Welcome to everyone who's joining us today on screen. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Bidjigal people as the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm joining you from today, and pay my deep respects to their elders past and present, and just acknowledge the important role that the traditional custodians of the land play in as creating a place of teaching and learning and knowledge sharing, and that continues with all of us today. And I extend my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are also joining us online today. My name is Rosemary Conn. I'm the acting CEO at the Centre for Social Impact, CSI. And for nearly 2 decades, the centre has worked alongside not-for-profits and businesses, government and philanthropy to really drive social change. And we do that through the education we offer, the research that we produce, and engaging with community. And we're really delighted that you've joined us today for this webinar on social impact measurement. We know that organisations are doing some really awesome work out there, but find it often challenging to demonstrate that they're really making a difference through measurement and evaluation. And today's session is designed to help make that process just a little easier and answer some of the most common questions and share some practical advice for you and real-world examples that you might be able to take with you into your work. And they come from CSI's free roadmap to social impact. So what exactly is the roadmap to social impact? For those of you who don't know or haven't come across it before, the roadmap is a downloadable step-by-step guide to social impact measurement, and it's designed to help you better plan and measure and also communicate the change that you're helping to create. And to support organisations at different stages of their journey, we've got two options for you. We've got a more concise ebook and also a comprehensive full guide. So the roadmap is a collaborative initiative that's part or brought to you by four universities that form part of the CSI network. So that's University of Western Australia, Swinburne, Flinders, and also UNSW. And together we develop research and practical tools that support systems level change and lasting social impact. And I'm joined by some of my colleagues from across those universities as well. So today you'll get to hear from Professor Paul Flatow, Dr. Rhiannon Parker, Professor Erin Wilson, and Associate Professor Selina Tuali. And we're also joined online as well by some of the people that have helped to bring the roadmap to life. The research team, so Dr. Kat Street's joining us, Andrew Joyce and Nadia Ibrahim, and also Dr. Lisette Calafeld was involved in putting all of this together. I'd like to also acknowledge that the support or what was brought, this whole webinar was brought to us by support from the AMP Foundation as a major funder of the Professor Peter Shergold Social Impact Fund, and we extend our sincere thanks to them for enabling this to happen. I can see a few things in the chat. We'll just try and fix for some of you some of the technical issues if we can. And we'd love to hear from you. So you'll see that there's a chat function, but also there's a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we'll have 15 minutes for Q&A today. If you can see on screen as well, for those of you that can access it, if you can click on the QR code on your screen, that'll allow you to stay up to date with the latest research, insights into social impact measurement, and hear more about future opportunities through CSI. So without further ado, perhaps we can kick off with asking one of the biggest questions that organisations come to us with, which is, why does social impact measurement matter? And like, where do I begin? Where do I start? And I'd really like to introduce you to Professor Paul Flatow to help us explore that question. So, Paul, can I throw over to you?
Yes, thanks very much. And that first question, why social impact measurement matters? Well, the key reason why it matters is that you, in an organization, in the social purpose sector, the social economy, want to demonstrate the difference that you are making in the lives of your beneficiaries. That's the prime reason. That's important in and of itself. But it's also of value because it provides for funding opportunities down the track. So the more you measure your impact robustly, the greater is your chance of getting funding. And then beyond that, we have the importance that measurement and evaluation plays in terms of service improvement within the organization, how you allocate resources, and learning within the organization. So, for all those reasons, but primarily because you want to know that you're making a difference to the lives of people you're serving. That's the prime reason. Now, of course, the roadmap was developed to meet a key part of the mission of the Centre for Social Impact, which is to develop the capability and knowledge in the social purpose sector and the social economy. So it's really part of our mission to create the roadmap. And it's designed for all of those working in the measurement and evaluation areas of social purpose organizations, as well as executive managers, managers alike, board members, and so on of social purpose organizations, but also government in terms of their funding of services, in terms of understanding what impact they're making through their own programs, all the way through to the role that measurement plays in social performance areas of the corporate sector and in terms of social businesses and social enterprises.
Thanks very much, Paul. That's really helpful. And just building on that, I'd like to throw over to Dr. Rhiannon Parker to help us to sort of explore what are some of the most common challenges organizations face when they're undertaking their social impact measurement journey?
Thanks, Rosemary. Three challenges often come up again and again when organizations are trying to understand and demonstrate their social impact. One is, and you can go to the next slide, how does our work fit into the bigger picture? So how can we credibly show our contribution when so many factors shape change? A second is, how do we demonstrate impact with limited resources? This is a pretty common one. So how can we produce credible evidence with the time, funding, and expertise that we actually have? And a third one is, how do we meaningfully engage people with lived experience? So who decides what success looks like, and how do we avoid overly burdening people? So let's start with limited resources. Many organizations have limitations on what they can produce. They have limited staff time or specialist evaluation knowledge, or they don't have enough dedicated funding, and sometimes the systems are set up just to collect activity and not outcome data. So 3 questions I find to make it a bit more manageable. First, what change are we trying to contribute to and for whom? And this is where something like a theory of change or a program logic can make that pathway and the assumptions behind it more visible. And that doesn't need to be elaborate. It can be quite simple. Second, what do we need the evidence? Sorry, why do we need the evidence and who will actually use it? So evidence for improving delivery may be different from evidence required for reporting or funding decisions or determining whether a program has caused change. And a third is, what do we already know and what are the biggest gaps? So organizations often have more data than they realize. In one recent project, providers were already recording referrals, service contracts, activities, and case closures. And the problem wasn't a lack of data, but it was that the data showed activity, but not necessarily what was changing for participants. And so the answer for that particular example was not a large new survey or many interviews, but to clarify the priority outcomes, to use relevant administrative data where it was already held, and then to add a small number of indicators and a brief participant feedback option where important gaps remained. So the practical message is proportionality, clarify the change in the purpose, use relevant evidence you already hold, and collect new information only when it feels an important gap. The next challenge I want to talk about is meaningfully engaging people with lived experience. Too often measurement is done to people rather than with them. So someone moving between services often has to repeat information. Sometimes it's distressing experiences, and they often don't know why or what will actually change. So this places a burden on people without necessarily giving them influence over how that information is used. So this is not just an ethical issue, it's also an evidence quality issue. Services may measure what is easiest to count, for example, but participants themselves identify safety, dignity, or control as what matters most. So without their involvement, we can measure the wrong thing really well. I find 3 principles that help. First, involve people early, while outcomes, questions, and methods can still change, and seek a range of perspectives, because obviously recognizing lived experience is diverse is very key here. Second, be clear about other people's influence. Are they defining the success? Are they designing the questions? Or are they interpreting findings? Genuine co-design really requires that people have the scope to influence key decisions. And then close the loop. So make sure that you explain to people what changed because of their input, maybe what didn't and why. Third, minimize burden and support people to participate safely. So check what information you already have, ask only what you need, and plan for accessibility, cultural safety, fair payment and reimbursement of expenses, informed consent, privacy, and access to support. Limited funding may mean involving fewer people well or partnering with perhaps a trusted organisation, but it shouldn't mean lowering ethical standards or expecting free expertise. Now let's turn to the bigger picture challenge, which I think we have a slide for. How can we credibly show our contribution when many factors shape it? So consider a time-limited service supporting people moving from custody into the community. It may help someone address a crisis, access housing or income support, or connect with other essential services. These changes are not the same as successful reintegration or reduced reoffending overall, but they can create important conditions for both. So longer term outcomes like reintegration are shaped by influences across every layer of this image, from family and community to housing, employment and other services, through to policing, policy, law and culture. These influences interact. No short-term program controls them all. So the practical task is to define the program's window of influence, and that is where systems thinking can help. What can the program realistically affect in evidence, and how are those nearer term changes connected to the longer term goal? So that's a distinction between attribution and contribution. Attribution asks, did our program cause the final change? While contribution asks, what credible role did we play? So 3 challenges and 3 practical approaches. Be focused on what you measure, involve people early and properly, and make claims that your evidence can actually support. Thanks, Rosemary.
Thank you, Rhiannon, and some good advice there that's very practical. For those of you who, I know some of you were saying that it's a bit difficult to see the slides, we will send through all of the slides afterwards, and we will also send through the recording, which means that you can revisit some of the commentary and slides from our speakers. So I'd like to now turn to Erin. So Professor Erin Wilson from CSI Swinburne. Erin, Rhiannon gave us a really good explanation of some of the challenges, and I'd love to ask you, how do we address some of these problems in outcomes measurement and evaluation in some really practical ways from your perspective?
Thanks very much, Rosemary. And Rhiannon has given us a great overview there. So thanks, Rhiannon. I think one of the things I'd like to start explanation of is thinking about the outcomes piece. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So the outcomes piece is often the first hurdle, if you like, identifying what are those outcomes that are in view. We often talk about what outcomes are going to be cooked inside the time frame of our initiative, because as Rhiannon described, we've got outcomes that are well down the track, but there are a range of things that we will be influencing and changes that we will be able to see within the time frame of our initiative. So the first challenge is selecting those ones that we will actually have some evidence for, that we would expect to change within the time frame of our initiative. And of course, there's a plethora of outcomes to choose from. Your funders give you outcomes that they hope you'll achieve. The system also suggests outcomes, your sector value outcomes. The evidence suggests different outcomes. And so one of the things that we've done at CSI Swinburne was to try and pull all of these together for you in a way that captures or maps the outcomes that are commonly used and focused on in the social purpose sector. So across hundreds of frameworks, policy documents, literature reviews, evidence, etc., we've thematized these into 12 common outcome domains and pictured them here as a tree. So this is a freely available website. You can search Community Services Outcomes Tree and find the tree. And it's really just one framework. You'll all be using your own frameworks from policy and other places, and this will have had those nested inside it. So inside the outcomes framework, we have these 12 big domains, and inside each of those, we can click on the leaves to a drop-down set of further outcomes. So this example on the screen is of social inclusion, where we can see that commonly the outcomes focused on in this area focus on things like social support, social connections, participation in community activities, feeling valued and belonging, having connections to culture and having a say in community. So these are often outcomes that are expected in funding and in other areas. So this is just a helpful way to prompt you in thinking about what are those outcomes. So really it's going to the pragmatics of that piece. Next slide, please. So, of course, once we know our outcomes, as Rhiannon talked about, we have to think about what's the data that's going to be useful. And of course, there is data often collected by your organisations, as Rhiannon's described, inside administration and program data. But also we might want to go and do some bespoke or targeted data collection. And often we think about these in the form of surveys or interviews or focus groups, or even generating case studies about those people that we're working with. So we have some choices here about how to go forward, and really it depends very much on those questions you want to answer. So if we're thinking about, the how much kind of questions, how much, to what extent, often that's quantitative data, frequently done through administrative data and surveys. But if we want to know why and how and understand the experience that people are having inside the initiatives that we're offering, then often, the way to do that is through that qualitative data. And it's often not a choice between one or the other, but a combination of those two things, because they're answering different sorts of questions, and we actually need to answer, frequently at least, need to answer all of them to understand how we might improve our initiative, or what kind of advocacy we might need to do in the broader system. Next slide, please. So again, on the Community Services Outcomes Tree website, we've done some work on thinking about what is the leanest way that we could ask a set of questions that's going to give us good information about the extent to which outcomes have been achieved and the things that have affected that achievement. So we've done this because we know that one of the issues for organisations is this lack of resources that's been talked about to date, that not everyone has time to go and develop a survey and think about what needs to be in it. So we've done that for you. There's a survey template on the website, and the website itself also offers now a semi-automated survey function, so you can identify the outcomes you want and it will auto-populate a survey for you that you can download, customize, change it up to suit your circumstances. It's just a starting point, in the same way that the roadmap is a starting point. And in our process, I guess what we've found as the leanest way to collect this data is to pay attention to these kind of 5 elements. One is outcomes. So what changed? Did things get better? Did things get worse? Did things stay the same? what was the contribution of the initiative to those outcomes, as Rhiannon talked about? And we asked that question directly of people, and they give very interesting answers about the way the initiative was run, or the activities of the initiative that they particularly valued. But most importantly, we ask about barriers to outcomes. And the reason why I say this is really important is because it helps us in our redesign of programs or initiatives, and also helps us advocate to funders and government and others, because it starts to draw out the structural and other barriers, as well as the personal barriers that might get in the way, not just the program barriers that get in the way to outcomes. And finally, always helpful to have information about service improvements from the user's point of view. And also offering some demographics as well, though not too many, is the feedback that we've been given from users of services. Thanks very much, Rosemary.
Thanks, Erin. And Erin just started to touch there a little bit on how some of that information, those data points and insights can be used. And so now I'd like to throw a question to Associate Professor Selina Tuali. Selina's from our CSI Flinders. Selina, once you've gone about collating your findings, how can they be used to improve our programs, our services, and influence decision making, and hopefully enable us to communicate impact far more effectively?
Thanks, Rosemary. Great question. And hello to everybody here from Ghanaland in Adelaide. So once you've collected and collated your data, this is where the real value and the fun, I would say, of social impact measurement begins. So social impact measurement is not just about proving what you've done, it's about improving what you do next. Your findings can help you identify what's working well, where outcomes are not quite matching expectations, and where you may need to adapt your programs or services. And sometimes the most valuable insights come from the things that didn't go as planned, what we might otherwise call failures. So just as a quick example from some current work the Flinders CSI team are doing in the child health and development space, bringing early years practitioners to childcare centres to do child health and development checks sounds like an impactful move, right? Well, only if the times work for the parents dropping off and picking up their young children. So with this work we were doing, when we looked into our impact and engagement data, we found that people weren't taking up the checks. Consequently, we looked into the program and realised that the hours that our nurses were on site weren't actually working for people, and so there was a shift in actual normal clinical hours to really get those checks moving, and then be able to create a holistic picture of need in a particular community, with actions flowing on from that to address those needs and to monitor the change over time. That's still a work in progress. So impact data is ultimately a decision-making tool. It helps you understand what's working, what's not working, and where your efforts are creating change, like Paul said at the start. It's evidence that can guide future planning, improve your programs, your support, funding applications, and help you make the best use of limited resources. And we're pretty much all working within the bounds of limited resources. Impact data also gives you greater confidence when telling the story of your work to boards, to funders, to partners, and to your community, because you are able to demonstrate not just what you did, but the difference it made. And I would say, don't underestimate the power of storytelling. People love impact stories that bring change to life. One of the concepts we talk about in the roadmap is getting to the so what. And this is a question I spend a lot of my time, working with. It's not enough to simply collect data or write a report. You have to ask yourself the so what question. What do our findings mean? What does our data tell us? What are we going to do differently because of them? That might mean working directly with program staff to explore how findings can be put into practice. For example, if an evaluation finds that culturally and linguistically diverse women are not accessing a domestic violence service, you could bring together service providers to identify ways to engage women and communities more effectively. It could also mean inviting senior managers or executives into a room to help shape recommendations where findings have broader implications for an organisation. And we've certainly done a lot of that work too. It could, or I would say perhaps should, involve co-developing practical responses with the people closest to the work and the people most impacted by the work, the program or a service. And Rhiannon just talked about that in terms of lived experience and the range of considerations that we should always run alongside any co-produced or co-developed work. Recent work Flinders colleagues have been involved with in a school considered disadvantaged on many measures offers an example of some co-development work. So the school's a trial site for hot school lunches and a hot school lunches program 5 days a week. The views of the school kids eating and not eating the lunches has been regularly used to evolve the menu. And they've been really blunt in their assessment of that menu sometimes, as kids often are. But ultimately, that evolution in the menu has meant greater response to that program, and it's had a range of impacts in terms of the lives of those children and their families. Those kids are getting at least 1 serve of vegetables a day. I won't bore you with the details of what lunchboxes look like for kids these days, but the kids are more settled, their behaviours have improved, and they're ready to learn in class. So, you know, feedback can sometimes be brutal, and you need to think about the whole range of stakeholders that might be involved in a program, including children, for example. Findings can also be used, shared with community level stakeholders as evidence of success, helping them communicate their achievements more broadly, strengthening partnerships and building new partnerships that might see a program develop in a different way or expand, and then also support future funding applications, as a number of us have mentioned. The key is to make sure findings don't simply sit in a report. They should be discussed, tested, and translated into clear actions. Ultimately, impact measurement is not the end of the process. It's actually the beginning of a next conversation. The goal is not simply to improve your impact, but to keep learning and improving over time. And I think that continuous improvement piece is really, really important. So if you're wondering where to go next after listening to today's webinar, I'd encourage you to keep things simple. You don't have to measure everything at once. Start with one program that you know needs improving, or that you have questions about the impact of, or that offers an opportunity for trialling something. You can even start with one outcome if you want to, and work towards an answer to an important question you might have. I'd say holding on to the old saying that, you know, how do you eat an elephant is a good approach here. You eat it one bite at a time. Thanks, Rosemary.
Thanks, Selena, and lots of food analogies there. I think we're all reminiscing back to our school lunches as well. But in all seriousness, it's really helpful to have that on the ground example and take the theory into practice. Paul, I'd love to round us back out with perhaps if you, before we get on to the Q&A, it would be really helpful to give us a bit of an overview of the roadmap, sort of 9 steps. We'll then go into a bit of a Q&A. So if anyone has any other questions, please pop them into the chat. There are some links that I think are a bit slow to load, which obviously we will circulate afterwards as well to make sure you have things like the CSOT website link. So Paul, might hand back over to you.
Yeah, so if we show the slide with the 9 steps. So the roadmap is precisely that, a roadmap where we've established a map of how you go about measuring and evaluating your impact. And as you can see here, you start with establishing your purpose. You go into the settings, the broad background, the fact that you are trying to achieve that purpose of making a difference, but you're working within a system and you need to understand that. And you're also working with stakeholders. You begin planning. That means looking at what you're trying to achieve in the programs that you're running. And we call that developing your program logic and theory of change. So you develop that in steps 1, 2, and 3, understand what you're going to measure, and you're going to then collect quantitative and qualitative data. And that was mentioned throughout, that it's important not just to think about impact measurement as just a quantitative thing. It covers both qualitative and quantitative components. And we talk about how you go about doing that measurement from a quantitative and qualitative point of view, how you do coding and so on. And then we go on to analyzing results. And this is where we get into the world of evaluation. We need to understand whether we're making a difference. So we need to understand what the reference point for that is. And you need to develop a design that enables you to do that. So we look at areas such as impact evaluation. But you also need to look at implementation of programs. So we examine process evaluation, of course, the fundamental area of economic evaluation. And then there is that question of translating your results, reporting, communicating, so important. And this is where you, as the person who is doing measurement and evaluation, or you, as the person who is doing communications within your organization, get together and look at how do you communicate your results to that wider world, and how do you communicate to your board as well, so that you can therefore demonstrate to the world what you're doing and make an impact that way. So that's the steps of the roadmap. You will have a link. Make sure you download your roadmap now.
Thank you very much, Paul. And as well as the roadmap itself, there are a range of options for any of you that might want to do any further study around measurement and evaluation. We have across our 4 partner universities, there are opportunities for graduate certificate and MBA courses, which all feature elements of measurement and evaluation. If you're looking for something shorter, there are 2-day outcomes measurements workshops delivered by csi.edu.au, and CSI Swinburne also offers a single unit enrolment in its evaluation and impact measurement unit from this September. Centre for Social Impact also offers some professional development courses around governance for social impact for not-for-profit board directors, and the Giving Academy if you're working on the philanthropy side of things. So wherever you're at, we encourage you to keep building and growing your knowledge, and don't forget to download a copy of the roadmap. And I'd now like to open up a chance for to respond to some of the questions that you've had, that you've put in the chat or message us about. And Paul, I'm going to start off with a question that's come through for you, which is that for organizations that, or people that are feeling slightly overwhelmed by the concept of impact measurement, what's one piece of advice about where do you start? How do you get started?
Well, you certainly start with the roadmap. That's a simple answer, of course. But there was some very sage advice from Selena, wasn't there, to keep it simple and keep it to what you can understand yourself. So she spoke about the need to think about a small number of outcomes first, and do what you can in terms of measurement, remembering to do a measurement both in terms of those quant measures and the stories, which you can then code into themes and so on. So that's the first place. I mean, obviously, download the roadmap, but keep it relatively simple. Learn, go through that process, understand what you're doing. So don't try and do some very complicated economic analysis before you've actually written your own program logic and so on. So do it step by step, get advice, but develop your own capability and don't rely solely on outside consultants.
Yeah, that's great advice, Paul. So we know that a lot of us have got that knowledge within our organizations already and some of that expertise. So thank you. One of the other questions that have come through, I might throw to Rhiannon. So the question is, what approaches have you seen work well when you're measuring changes in organizational culture? So maybe Rhiannon, or let me know if you want me to throw the question to someone else.
I can give a brief answer. When looking at organizational culture, I think it's really important that you do your stakeholder engagement well, ethically and well. So making sure you're talking to all the levels within an organization and understanding what their priorities are, what their aims are, and so on and so forth. But also getting insight from them to kind of co-design a lot of that data collection as well. So understanding what's important for every stakeholder at the management level and at the frontline level can be really, really important. Someone else might have something else to add.
Yeah. Erin, do you want to jump in? I think you might have had a comment in the chat or something you wanted to
You
add.
caught me out there, Rosemary. I was
I did,
responding
I
to
could
somebody
see.
in the chat who was asking about standardizing
Ah.
programs and measurements. So I was actually responding to that one, which in short, the person was suggesting we've been sort of moving from this idea of quite pragmatic and targeted and directed evaluations into something where we might standardize and compare
Mm.
results. And I guess whilst there's always this tendency to try and do that, I think it's very hard to do on the ground. There's such difference in context and participant and intensity and delivery of programs that there might be some aspects that are useful to compare, but we absolutely also have to hold on to those differences. So I think this, to some extent, Rhiannon's point about valuing the context of the individuals and bringing that lived experience in is always really key to really understand the experience in situ.
And as we've got you, Erin, just a slightly different question that's come through that given your University of Technology, you might be able to shed some light on. So what role does AI have in analysis of results of program outcomes?
It's a really interesting question. It's one I think that we're all testing to some extent. There are certainly some issues in keeping that data private and making sure it stays within the ethical confines of the way it was given to us in the first place. So, people don't expect their data to be shared with AI platforms generally. So we have to think very carefully about that. And we also have to get really good at writing the right instructions for AI because it does tend to both hallucinate and make things up, but it also sees things in ways that perhaps we wouldn't see it. We're real people with a whole contextual background. So I think there's a ongoing place for humans to make sense of human experience and the complex interfaces and things that go on with that. So I want to encourage us to stay on it as the sort of experts of context and nuance to bring that rich interpretation to the data.
Yeah, thank you. And Selena, I might throw the next question to you. So Erin touched a little bit on this in her section, but maybe Selena, be good to hear your perspective on how do we find the balance between the qualitative and quantitative findings when we're presenting or writing a report, particularly?
Yeah, that's a perpetual battle and question, I guess, for anyone that's in the evaluation and outcomes measurement space. I think part of the answer comes in what you're actually trying to achieve and for which audience. So, you constantly have to think about the multiple audiences that we're often talking to or seeking to storytell for or with. And so I think, if it's a broad community audience, going really heavy-handed on the quantitative data is not going to get it's not necessarily going to translate. If you're talking to a funder and you know that what they're looking for in terms of impact is something that looks more like output data or activity data, then that's obviously where you would lean more heavily into the quantitative side of things. I will say, going back to my point about the power of storytelling, that I think storytelling, the qualitative narrative type stuff, cuts through everywhere. And so, I think there's an art to storytelling, and I think we need to do it more and better. And that really does rely on good quality qualitative data. And I think there's a significant place for that, and that doesn't seem to be changing. It seems to be intensifying as a broader community and sector desire around the storytelling side of things. It's a tricky balance. It is a tricky balance.
And while I have you, Selena, someone else has just asked a question, and you just started to touch on it, which is that if so they're an industry partner and they're funding local programs, what's their role in measuring impact? What role do you think they think? or
As a
should say,
as
as
a
a industry
funder,
partner. Yeah.
as a funder.
Yeah.
So context specific in a way, the answer to that question. So, I mean, I guess if you look at some of the philanthropy organizations around the place, they're playing a massively increased role in that storytelling space over time, and they're seeing that as something that they can really add value to conversations and the knowledge base and evidence for the broader community. And I guess industry partners the same. So if you see that advocacy role or that broader evidence sharing and learning role as part of your organisational mandate and mission, I think all power to you. That's a great thing. And, you know, I am a university academic. I believe that we actually should be sharing our learning widely. And I think that's the same for industry and government. I know sometimes commercial and confidence stuff cuts into that conversation, but I think, you know, in the sort of knowledge thirsty world that we all live in, and a world in which, you know, we need to really promote truth and decent information, I think everybody has a stake in getting the information out there and, you know, sharing their data widely.
Thanks, Selena. And Paul, a question for you that's come through, which is, how can social impact measurement be better connected into broader organization-wide strategic planning?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of points here. Strategic planning often doesn't make any mention of outcomes measurement. So that's the first point, that we need to embed outcomes measurement and evaluation into the broad strategy vision of the organisation, the values of the organisation. And I often say that we actually need a strategy for measurement and evaluation itself in an organisation. So what is your vision for measurement and evaluation? What values are you going to bring to your measurement and evaluation? Values could be truthfulness, an ethical approach, robustness in the work that we do. So let's all write in our organizations, in our funding mechanisms, our actual strategy for measurement and evaluation, but then also make sure that in our mission statement for the general strategy of the organization, we have a statement about measurement and evaluation. So I think this is fundamental, and I'd like to see organizations do more of this kind of work.
That sounds good. Thank you. And then we have one final question, and as I've got you on the screen, Paul, I might keep you there. So the question or the comment is, I think closing the loop is one of the most important yet overlooked aspects of evaluation. What are some practical recommendations for how to do this? And how do you know when it's been done sufficiently?
Well, closing the loop can mean all sorts of things, but I take it to mean that you actually bring the findings from your measurement and evaluation into the organization from a learning point of view. So we now talk a lot about MEL, don't we? The monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework. The learning side of this is still to be developed properly, I think, but you bring your findings in to how you organize your services or how you fund services going forward. And so it is a feedback loop, and it's continuous improvement via measurement and evaluation into service design and so on. The other sense in which we close the loop is to get our findings out there into the wider world as well. And also in that sense, because we're so focused, I think, on the importance of systems, that we learn from each other in our systems and we bring our findings together. And so an organization does not just limit itself to its own organizational findings, but goes off sector-wide, talks to funders. These are our findings. What about your findings? What can we learn from each other? So closing the loop might be closing the loop in the system that we work with, in the sector that we work with. And we need to see more of that. I'm telling the sector what to do, but a little bit. This is the piece, aren't I? So anyway, but I think they're good ideas.
That is a great way for us to wrap up in our Q&A. Thank you, Paul, with a bit of a call to action for all of us. So for those of you that would like to stay connected with us, please do subscribe to our newsletter, use the QR code to do that or the link in the chat. There'll be a recording of today's webinar that we'll send to you shortly. Please send it on to anyone else that you think might be interested. And we'll also send around some FAQs. Download the roadmap, and just want to say a massive thank you to our panel for your contribution, to all of those who've joined us here today. On behalf of CSI, and we really appreciate your time and commitment, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thanks very much.